Lamin. Today I must say I am here as a journalist, and I must say that I am here as a young person who is trying to poise to make sure that your development as your people is ensured. Well, I am here because I belong with you. I am happy to be in the LRR, even though I don't come from the LRR. I am happy to be amazing young people, and of course elderly people, who want to make sure to augment the plight of young people in this country. Of course, like Lamin mentioned, I'll be moderating this very important session on the National Dialogue for Reforms in the Gambia. And like one of the speakers talked about yesterday, when you talk about a reform, it means there is an ill. It means there is something wrong. And of course, we know there are so many ills in this country that has to be corrected. And it was to that effect that the government of the Gambia actually put together all of these 4 very important strategic reforms. They are, of course, as you already know, the National Human Rights Commission, the Security Sector Reform, the Constitutional Review Commission, and of course, something that we all follow, the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission. Of course, I am a journalist, but like I said, I am not here as one, and I work at GRTS, but today I am not a GRTS presenter. So be rest assured that I will make sure that this panel will be as interactive as possible. So there will come such a time when we'll allow questions from you. You'll also have the time to raise your concerns and your questions about some of the key issues that we'll be talking about right here. But of course, I wouldn't be doing that alone. I would be joined by a panel. And I have the honor and pleasure to ask you all to join me in welcoming on stage Sekou Soare Jabai. Sekou is Communications Assistant of the Constitutional Review Commission. Also join me in welcoming from the National Human Rights Commission, Mr. Mansour Job. Also, I would like to welcome the National Security Advisor, Security Sector Reform of the Gambia, ably represented by my sister, Ms. Rahis Samba Jallow. Of course, the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission, ably represented by Mr. Babukar Sambu. Babukar, please join me on stage. So with the caliber of very seasoned people we have here talking about their various reforms, I'm sure we are going to have a very interactive session. And like I mentioned, there will be such a time when you'll have the opportunity to seek clarifications on issues about the reforms. But for now, I'll hand you over to Lamin, because I'm sure we have another performance from artists. So that will serve as a comic relief, right? To make sure that we are all on a strong footing for this very important session. Lamin.
Okay. So let's go straight to the spotlight.
All right, so we'll do the entertainment later on in the program. But now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in calling on Mr. Hussein Thomasi. Mr. Hussein Thomasi is our spotlight speaker. He works at the Ministry of Justice. He is advisor to the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Mr. Hussein Thomasi, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Fatou Cham Jame. It's a pleasure meeting you, and thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, Honorable Chairperson of the Mansa Konko Area Council, Mr. Landing Sane, Honorable Member of the National Assembly, Honorable Gassama, Honorable Councillors, Your Excellency, the United Nations Resident Representative to the Gambia, Madam Aissata Deh, Mr. Dembo Kambi, the National Chairman of the National Youth Council, members of the various commissions here present, and the representatives of some of the mechanisms also here present, honorable invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to start by extending on behalf of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Justice, and on my own behalf, our condolences to the United Nations Development Program and to Madam Aissata Deh and staff of the UNDP for their loss. In fact, the late Bintu Mahfouz Haidara was somebody that I knew personally and someone I had worked with in Accra, Ghana at the West African Monetary Institute. And I recall she was a very hardworking person and somebody who loved to excel in the performance of her duties. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her Jannatul Firdaus. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I intend to be very brief. In fact, I believe the Bright Stars have done a very good introduction for us. No wonder they are bright stars. They have told us what the security sector reform is all about, and they have also introduced some of the reforms and mechanisms that the government has embarked upon. In fact, in their own words, the security reform is all about having an efficient and responsive security service that is subject to democratic control and one that is also sustainable in terms of budgetary allocation and something that we can manage within our means. In December 2017, the government through the National Assembly had cause to pass 3 important legislations, namely the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission Act, the Constitutional Review Commission Act, and the National Human Rights Commission Act. These 3 pieces of legislation are very important pillars for the reform program of the government. Earlier in 2017, a security sector reform program had commenced and is still ongoing. And I have stated the objective has been stated for us. Progress has been made in that regard, and I believe the experts are here. We have a representative from the security sector who will tell us much about that. And as our able moderator has stated, why do we embark on these reforms? You just don't embark on reforms for reform's sake. You do so because you recognize that there is a problem. You all know that we're emerging from a very difficult past. I need not dilate on it. We have had 22 years of oppressive and dictatorial rule in this country that has created a lot of problems. These problems, as all of you can now see from the TRRC, proceedings of the TRRC, they are being unfolded daily in our eyes. We are glued to our televisions, witnessing the gruesome things and events that took place in this country. The TRRC actually was intended to do that. Investigate the past, ensure accountability, put victims at the center of the program, ensure that we grant them reparations, as well as come up with comprehensive recommendations that would introduce reforms in this country to ensure that never again do we have a repetition or reoccurrence of the events that took place here. That's what we seek to achieve from the TRRC. And so far, the journey is good. We are all happy, and we believe the TRRC is a very useful mechanism to achieve our objective in terms of bringing about comprehensive reforms so that we ensure that never again do we have a repetition of massive human rights violations and abuses in this country. Apart from the TRRC, the government has put in place a constitutional review commission, and that commission has promised us that by the end of the year, they will deliver a draft constitution and a report. We are all looking forward to it. Of course, their activities have been preceded by large-scale national consultations, as well as consultations with Gambians in the diaspora. We all know as Gambians that the 1997 Constitution is not working for us, did not work for us. It's a constitution that has been subject to so many abuses, a constitution that has been amended several times, a constitution that concentrates too much power in the executive. It's a constitution that could be amended as and when you wish. It's a constitution that has no term limits. It's a constitution that also undermines the independence of the judiciary. The government recognized that, and the people of this country recognize that. That's why we are embarking on a constitutional review so that we can have a constitution that truly reflects the wishes and aspirations of the Gambian people, as well as a constitution that is modern and adapted to best practices, that serves as a check on excess executive power, and a constitution that can empower the citizens and deliver an independent judiciary. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time in the history of this country, we have a National Human Rights Commission. This is a milestone achievement for a country like the Gambia. It's a very important institution in this country, and this institution is here to stay. It is a commission, but it's a permanent commission. It is not like the other commissions which have a lifespan. The TRRC is set up for 2 years initially, and the Constitutional Review Commission for a period of 18 months. But the National Human Rights Commission is here to stay. It is to protect our fundamental rights as citizens, and also to ensure that the government conforms with human rights obligations. We have constitutional guarantees of fundamental rights, but we do not have a framework for the enforcement and guarantee of these rights. The National Human Rights Commission will do that function, but the experts are here and they will tell you more. But let me briefly state, and I will take my seat, that these reforms are not reforms for reform's sake. They are very important and significant for this country. They have an objective. They are all geared towards transforming the Gambia into a better country, a country where the rule of law will prevail, a country where democracy will strive, a country where peace will also prevail. That's the objective of putting in place all these reforms. They serve a purpose. And of course, in carrying out these reforms as a government, we have involved over the years all segments of Gambian society, in particular the youth. But I will leave that to the members of the commission, perhaps the members of the panel. They will tell you youth involvement in these commissions. because we believe that the youth of this country are very important in the reform process. I believe on this note, I will take my seat, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hussein Thomas, Special Advisor to the Ministry of Justice, to the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice. Now we've all heard what he said. I mean, the conversation there is very much clear. Now, it was in 2017, barely 2 years ago, when the government of the Gambia actually created some of the acts of parliament that created most of the reforms that we'll be talking about here. He has said that progress has been registered in most of the reforms, but we are here to assess that, how much progress has been made. And in the progresses that have been registered, what is in them for the young people in this country. But before we do that, I'll talk a bit about the inspiration that I have coming over here. We are usually very busy at the GRTS. We don't usually go out. But I must say, I got really inspired, and the amount of commitment and passion that these people at the National Youth Council have, it's something that actually caught my attention. You have a group of young people, the likes of Lamin Dabo, the likes of Sima and Manka. They're really an inspiration. I mean, seeing them walk around, trying to make sure that things walk around here, I think we need to get the DJ to get my voice a bit down. So I am this very vocal person, all right? I apologize for that. All right, so this kind of inspiration that these people at the National Youth Council inspire in young people, I mean, it leaves me waiting so eagerly about what the next 5 years really has for young people in this country. But we'll keep my inspiration for coming here. We'll talk about that. That will be a subject for another day. But for now, like I mentioned, I have my very seasoned panelists. They are Mr. Mansour Joe from the National Human Rights Commission, Madam Samba from the Office of National Security, and of course, we have somebody from the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission, and quite importantly, we have Sekou Suare Jabai, Communication Assistant from the Constitutional Review Commission. So this would take the form of a question and answer, after which you'll have the time to also pose in your questions. So this will be as part of your opening statement, Mr. Mansour Job. You talked to us about the mandate of the National Human Rights Commission, especially, I mean, as it relates to the plight of young people in this country.
Thank you very much for the moderator. To our dear, I don't know, the other one. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'm very much glad to be part of this very important discussion. Actually, I remember being at Mansa Konko, RDI in particular, some time ago while I was still going to school. I remember it was one of these halls, I cannot remember actually, and I was too short then. When I was behind the podium, you hardly see me, so they had to bring in a chair. So when I came back here today, it reflected me, it gave me those memories. So I'm very happy to be in LRR and RDI in particular. Just to come to the program straight, I am from the National Human Rights Commission, as stated by the previous speaker. This is a commission that is permanent in nature, unlike the other transitional processes that are ongoing in the country. And we have a very broad mandate. And the mandate is as per the Paris Principle, which has certain guidelines that every national human rights institution should have. And the mandate of the National Human Rights Commission, just to highlight some, is to ensure the protection and promotion of human rights in the Gambia. We all know the past that we are coming from. Violation of human rights was basically an order of the day. And the ultimate objective of setting up the National Human Rights Commission is to ensure that this commission will continuously monitor as well as investigate human rights violations. So if there is any violation of human rights by any person or authority in the Gambia, then there is a permanent institution that you can lodge the complaint to. So the National Human Rights Commission, in essence, has a very broad mandate. It can investigate human rights violation. It can monitor human rights violation. It can also undergo studies on some of the challenges that are faced with some of the other security agencies in the Gambia, for example, the police, in areas of handling protests and demonstration, so on and so forth. And the National Human Rights Commission has the mandate to come up with guidelines that will ensure that law enforcement and other actors in the rule of law act in accordance with the law. So basically, as the discussions proceed, we'll be highlighting more of the functions and role of the National Human Rights Commission. But in essence, it has the mandate to ensure the promotion and protection. But before I hand over the mic, I just want to highlight something. The promotion, protection of human rights is the obligation of the state. The state is the #1 duty bearer. It is their responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. So the Commission is here to ensure that the state complies with those obligations given to it by the Constitution and other regional and international instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joe, from the National Human Rights Commission. Now I'll just quickly cross over to the representative of the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission. When you talk about the TRRC, now when you talk about the TRRC, what is in it for young people? You talk about people having to come out and tell the truth. You talk about reconciliation and reparation. How are these things tailored to make sure that they benefit for young people?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and good afternoon to all of you here. The question, what TRRC has for young people, I will start by saying, first of all, TRRC, the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, is a commission of the young people, because 98% of the TRRC staff are young people. And when we say young people, we mean young people that are, with the definition of young people in the National Youth Charter or National Youth Policy, that is between 13 and 35 years. 98% of TRRC's staff are within this age bracket. So even the Deputy Executive Secretary is within this age cohort. The Deputy Director of Research and Investigation is within this cohort. I am here representing the Executive Secretary. So the TRRC staffing alone is a youthful commission. And in fact, we can remember when the Executive Secretary started employing a lot of young people in the TRRC, there were some elites asking questions. Why did so many young people for TRRC? What value can they add in the work of TRRC? What experience do they have? What is their qualification? How can they help TRRC to achieve its objective? But my brothers and sisters, young people sitting here today, is TRRC a failure already? Can it fail? Because the young people are leading the work. So it's a youth commission, I can say, belong to Gambians, because it is Gambians that set up the TRRC. After a nationwide consultation, the old were consulted, they said we need a commission called TRRC. The youth and children were consulted, they said we need TRRC, and the commission was set by the National Assembly by an Act of Parliament called the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, TRRC Act 2017. And the mandate is to establish an impartial historical records of violations of human rights that happened in the Gambia between July 1994 and January 2017. So this is what the TRRC is mandated to investigate, to promote healing and reconciliation, to make sure our country, those who are angry, calm down by knowing the truth of what happened to their relatives, their family members, their loved ones, what happened to them. By knowing that can relieve them of the pain and also help in national reconciliation. But also to, to provide victims the opportunity to express themselves, to say what has happened to them, to give a full account of what they have gone through, and also make known the whereabouts of the disappeared people. Those who did not know what happened to their people, those who knew just their people just disappeared and they don't know whether they are dead or alive. The TRRC is mandated to find out, to know what actually happened to these people and get it to the public. This is another thing. But importantly also, to grant reparations. The Gambia's TRRC is different from other TRRCs because it does not only it is not only going to recommend reparations, but can actually grant reparations. That we understood so and so person need this kind of support, and as a commission they can act, and that is why a medical board has made recommendations of 9 people already who are preparing to go to Turkey for treatment, and there are education support for some young people who have been victims of human rights violations. So the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, as he said, is a commission that is for young people because the Never Again campaign that has been mandated to TRRC to prevent the recurrence, which is never again. It's not talking about today. The never again is not talking about yesterday. It's talking about the future. That what happened here yesterday should never ever happen. And who is going to carry that forward? That is us, the young people. So the commission is ours as young people, and let's take it as young people, because the young people are proving at TRRC that yes, when given the chance, we can do the work, and 98% is doing this work at TRRC as youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babakar Sambu from the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission. Now, when you talk about reforms in this country, one very important area is the Office for National Security. It is the security sector reform. We know when we talk about ills that happen in this country, you talk about the security sector. It is one sector that has not been doing very well, especially in the last 22 years. And having Madam Rohit Samba to be here for the special advisor to the president, that is something we need to make very important use of. And when we talk about security sector reform, Madam Samba, what exactly are we looking at? We want you to paint us a picture of what it means to have a security sector that is reformed. What does it mean to your office?
Thank you very much, Fatmata, for having me here. As I always say, at this historic juncture in our democracy, I was expecting that you will ask me about the security sector reform and the youth bulge, but that's okay. I didn't want to go to the historical antecedents of the security sector reform process because it's been narrated over and over again. But since you asked about it again, I'll just make it I'll try to define security sector reform to the people once again and make it as simple as possible. Because most of our problems is these jargons, these big jargons that people don't hardly understand. To begin with, I'll talk about national security policy. This is the document that was launched recently on the 10th of June. And the national security policy actually gives direction for security and defense reform. The national security policy, according to the president of the country, espouses an ideal security that is based on human security. Now, this is important because traditionally, since 1965, our security has been oriented on the traditional security approach, which is security against internal and external aggression. Security for the state. Yesterday, somebody eloquently expressed that here. But security should not be limited to the state. The ideal security approach deals with human security. And now this talks about not only the political security, where I can rally without having the fear, where I can express to be a UDP, NRP member without having that fear, because security When we talk about it, I have a maritime background, so I'm going to, I don't know whether we have the time, but in maritime we have two things. We talk about safety and we talk about security. Now these two things are distinct. Safety talks about the things that you do to protect yourself. If I'm going out and maybe I'm afraid of my mobile phone being snatched away from me, I have to protect myself. That is safety. Now, security is something that is external from you. So in maritime safety, we talk about the things that we do so that the vessel can ply seaworthy, can reach its destination, watertight integrity, the use of life jackets, and so forth. And when we talk about safety, we talk about armed robbery, piracy, those external afflictions. So the ideal human security talks about that security we know. That security, that when we leave our doorsteps, economic security is provided through sustainable livelihoods, agriculture means, that we have environmental security, our environment is safe from degradation, that we have political security, as I've mentioned earlier, we have social security within our tribes, that we don't have these tribal conflicts, and finally, it is impinged on human rights. So this ideal security, as espoused in our national security policy, comes about because of a degradation of our laws. As has been mentioned numerous times, since 1994, our laws have been changed 52 times to suit somebody's whims and fancies. This is what we don't want to happen anymore. We want a security sector that have concrete laws, institutional policies, because these laws were also devoid of norms. Let's say, for example, the Police Act. It has not been changed since 1948. The Police Act we are currently using has been there since 1948. Now, what kind of Police Act that was formulated in 1948 can cater to the needs of the police here, fast forward how many years later, in 2019. So security sector reform is actually the way we reformulate, reorient, and if not existing, create policies, standards, procedures that are in accordance with democratic norms, accountable to rule of law, but also accountable to the justice and security needs of the citizenry. That is what we are aspiring for with this security sector reform. And if we go further, we will tell you some of the tangible things we are doing in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Rohi Samba, for giving us an insight as to the mandate of the Office for National Security. Now, we also have Sekou Suare Jabai. Sekou works at the Constitutional Review Commission as communication assistant. And Madam Samba has mentioned that our laws have been changed or repealed for over 50 times to actually just suit the whims and the caprices of a particular group of people. I hope that is not what the Constitutional Review Commission is doing to us at the moment. I mean, you've held series of internal and external consultations. We wanted to know, as you tell us about your mandate, how much have you engaged young people in this country?
Well, thank you very much, Fatoumata. So, Bright Stars Entertainment really did a good job for us. I actually will suggest to the National Youth Council, in your next editions, you don't need to invite the Constitutional Review Commission to attend the panel. All that you need to do is to print the relics of Bright Star's song on the CRC and then hand it over to the participants. That would really do. So just to come back to your question, really, the Constitutional Review Commission of the Gambia, has been established by an act of parliament. And then our mandate is very simple. That is to review and analyze the 1997 Constitution, which we are using currently, and then to draft a new Constitution for the Republic of the Gambia. But more importantly, we are also mandated to prepare a report in relation to the draft Constitution that we are presenting to the National Assembly.
So it's a 1 year, 18 months mandate, and then we will hopefully be winding up in December. Hopefully we'll submit the draft constitution to the President of the Republic of the Gambia. So this constitution came at a better time. I mean, we don't need to go to the details of the 1997 constitution. I mean, it has been butchered and mutilated over 50 times, during the 22 years regime of the former president. And this goes to show that quite a lot of amendments that were done during his time were just meant to basically entrench himself to power and also give him more powers to rule over in a very undemocratic fashion. So as I said, we've basically gone through quite a lot of consultations, both national and international. But just to tailor it down to the youth perspective of our consultations, you would obviously know that it's an 11-member commission, and then we have a youth commissioner in the person of Commissioner Yankuba Manjang, who has not only been appointed by the president, but the appointment was really consultative, and then recommendations for his appointment basically came from the National Youth Council. So this goes to show that this individual is not just a nominated individual of the president, but by all facets a youth commissioner. So he's been doing a very good job at the level of the commission, representing our interests, your interests as young people of the Gambia. And talking about what we've been doing in terms of youth engagement, you would all realize that the Constitutional Review Commission of the Gambia held a very, participatory nationwide consultation where about 106 settlements were visited. And not only the 106 communities that were visited, each community that we visit, surrounding villages across, that particular environment are also invited to come, and participate in the discussions. And apart from the general preliminary that goes through, we also have focus group discussions with young people, specifically to give them more opportunities to talk about, their needs and aspirations. And apart from that also, we, as part of the nationwide consultations, we go to schools, high schools and junior secondary schools across the country as well, where we target students who, by 2021, they would be at a voting age, that is 18 years. So the consultation is not only meant for, the public, as in, those we meet at the banter bars and ghettos and all that. We also talk to students to ensure that they have a say in this new constitution. So it's been really engaging in terms of our engagement with young people. Brass Stars are here. We've engaged musicians like Backstars Entertainment, Killer Ace, ST, and other mechanisms that we all use to ensure that we get to young people, not only those in the conventional halls that we can meet here, but also individuals that, the voices of the music can actually reach. So these are some of the ways that, my colleague from the CRC talked about, 98% of their staff as young people. I may not be able to give specific statistics, but to be quite honest, we also have over 90% of our staff there as young people, and they're doing quite a lot of work in terms of ensuring that young people are engaged. So you would also know that as part of the consultation process, we've been inviting position papers from individuals, institutions, and groups alike. So the National Youth Council, together with their partners, held a nationwide consultation where, they've solicited the views and aspirations of young people across the constituencies we have. And then they've basically come out with a position paper that was presented, at the level of the Constitutional Review Commission. And not only that, we have other young youth-focused organizations who've also submitted reports, who've also submitted position papers, to the Constitutional Review Commission, and individuals alike. So these are some of the platforms we've created, and in terms of engaging young people, these are some of the things that we've done to ensure that young people are engaged. And I can assure you that the Constitutional Review Commission is aware that young people constitute the majority in terms of the country's population, and no meaningful development can take place without them. At the level of the Commission, we want to prepare and finally deliver a constitution that will stand the test of time. And that basically means a constitution that each and every Gambian will find, ownership in, that each and every Gambian will feel a sense of belonging. So that cannot happen if you really don't involve young people. We want the final product to be youth-friendly. I mean, I think we're basically doing that from the onset right down to where we are now. So young people are custodians of, vital custodians of the country's development. And at the level of the Constitutional Review Commission, we appreciate this fact, and we're working hand in glove with our individuals to ensure that a youth-friendly constitution is prepared at the end of the day.
Right, thank you very much, Sekou Suare Jara of the Constitutional Review Commission. Of course, that's a very interesting reform when we're talking about changing in the new Gambia. Of course, we have a lot of questions for Sekou because separate apart from having to engage young people. Quite often we sit on our offices and then we see press releases from the CRC that they are traveling, that they are going on external consultations, and we say to ourselves, these are the same people that we have asked to draft us a people-centered constitution. What are they doing outside? So that is something very important that we'll be talking about. But I just want to draw the attention of Madam Samba to something very significant that we talked about. I mean, when you talk about security sector reform in the country, we must talk about the gap between dealing and dealing with the land that we are dealing right now. How long do we have to wait before we get the security sector?
Thank you, Fatmata. Security sector reform is a process. It's not a commission, temporary or permanent. But as a process, it has to take its natural cycle. Because of that, the process has been compartmentalized into project components. Now, these project components have at the top an assessment. I think all palliative measures to bring buy-in to any project has to start with an assessment. That's natural. So in that regard, a 27 technical working group was commissioned to go all over the country and do an extensive assessment of the situational and institutional characteristic that will inform the security sector reform project. Now, don't get me wrong when I call it a project. I'm just trying to explain, because a project it is not. It is a cycle. So when we did that assessment, we were able to ask, for 2 weeks, we were able to ask salient questions like whether the Gambia needs a military, among other things. What are the security and justice aspirations? Because when I say security, I bring justice. That deals with the bleeding, healing thing. What are the security and justice aspirations of a citizenry? Aside from that situational analysis, the situational assessment that involves people, you talked about the institutional, because you also need a forensic audit of these security institutions. Most of them are bleeding. In that, there's a dearth of capacity, degenerated by a whimsical leader who for 22 years, brought in people based on politics, and the one we don't like to talk about much, ethnicity, which created a void in norms and democratic principles. So to right that balance, this in-depth assessment also did a forensic audit of these institutions, what they lack in terms of capacity, capability, equipment. Then again, you go to the next stage. This assessment itself informed the next part of that project cycle, which is the programming stage. Because security sector reform in all countries have these processes. This programming stage, as I mentioned, is where we actually are. That's where we launched the NSP, which was widely publicized and well attended by the president or regional governors and everybody. Now, after that, you have the strategy, the SSR strategy. Now, normally, SSR strategy can be based on two. It can be based on reforming the situational process itself or governance. And when you talk about security sector governance, you are talking about the provision the provision, management, and implementation on SSR projects to ensure democratic norms as well as accountability of actors are restituted. Now, this security sector governance is hinged on 5 thematic areas that were outlined in the assessment. And these include an overarching policy for one, reform activities related to specific institutions, reforms that address cross-cutting and perennial issues like gender mainstreaming, because we all know that our security is very, very, very gender insensitive. In that, let's say GAF, for instance, have over 6,000 personnel, only 10% are female. Then you address the post-authoritarian legacies that you talked about, and then you address the reformation to enable civilian oversight. Because if we have strong institutions that have oversight authority over these security institutions, that restoration of democratic norms and rule of law would be easier. And as we speak now, all of these processes are ongoing. The planning and the programming stage of these, where policies lack, these are being formulated. You have seen the renaming of the National Intelligence Agency into SIS. You have talked about the graduation of prison officials, because the intention of taking people to prison is to reform, rehabilitate, and then reintegrate in society. This was not being done. Recently, this has been happening. We've been graduating prisoners on skills so that when they come out, at least they can have something to do. There's a lot of processes that are going on that are not benchmarked as security sector reform. But I'm telling you, since 2017, everything that is done with respect to security, whether it is soft training or the bringing of hard elements to the security, is part of security sector reform. The tangible.
The funding of the security sector reform. Because, our government is very good at coming up to tell us that their coffers are empty. In fact, recently, there's been a disclosure that the National Development Plan, our over-ambitious National Development Plan, is facing some funding challenges. Wouldn't that translate into security sector reform being affected and achieved?
Fatoumata, our over-ambitious National Development Plan, it what we have been yielding for so long. Having traveled at a very young age, I always question how our predecessors have been so little-hearted. Look at our roads, so tiny, no room for expansion. This overarching National Development Plan, which will show the direction of all our development projects, needs to be over-ambitious. Now, with respect to funding, we are a developing country. That's why you have partners like UNDP, you have other partners that are assisting in our development programs. With respect to security sector reform, we have 9 international partners currently stationed at the Office of National Security. You have them from AU, you have EU, you have UNDP, of course, you have ECOWAS, for whom I actually work. They embedded me at the Office of National Security. And you have other development partners. Some of them are Turkey, Germany. There's the natural goodwill to actually assist the security sector reform. What is lacking perhaps a little bit is the sense of direction. Because since after releasing the assessment, there is still no white paper. So you have a lot of government white papers per se. So you have a lot of development partners choosing, instead of us directing them where we need these reforms to take place. And as the coordination office, the Office of National Security that is, we are trying to work on that so that everything will be coordinated and then the direction will come from us, not the development partners. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Madam Rohit Samba. I think we've talked so much about national security and the Office of National Security. But then I am seeking clarification from Mr. Mansour Job of the National Human Rights Commission. Now, for the purpose of clarity, when you talk about the mandate of the National Human Rights Commission. Somebody did mention here yesterday during their presentation that it has a similar mandate with the TRRC, and I beg to differ, because the TRRC, as far as we know, looks at past human rights violation, and then the NHRC looks at human rights violations going forward. So that's something I want you to clarify.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. The mandate of the National Human Rights Commission, to start with, is very unique and is fundamentally different from the mandate of the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparation Commission. As you rightly alluded to, the Human Rights, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is looking into past human rights violations, i.e. those violations that allegedly occurred between July 1994 to January 2017. And the National Human Rights Commission Act came into being in December 2017. So the Act was established in December 2017, and the Act has clearly spelled out the mandate and jurisdiction of the National Human Rights Commission. And if you look at the provisions of the National Human Rights Commission, it is clearly indicated that the Commission can only look into human rights violations that occurred after the coming into force of the National Human Rights Commission Act. So in other words, the NHRC is a forward-looking commission. It is a commission that looks into violations that occur from now going forward. And the past is what we left with the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission. And as we said, because there is some linkages or some similarities between these two commissions, because in addition to ensuring the promotion and protection of human rights in the Gambia, the NHRC is also empowered to monitor the improvement that is made by government on these areas. And this is where the NHRC will play a very important role after the transition of or after the phasing out of the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparation Commission, because there will be some structures, so on and so forth, which we may discuss later as the discussion proceeds.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Mansour Joe from the National Human Rights Commission. Of course, there are other issues that I'll come back to Madam Samba for, and of course, Mr. Job. But then let's talk about the Constitutional Review Commission. Seiko, how close to getting, you like to call it a people-centered constitution? Of course, that is what we want. But how close to getting it are we?
So that is really our mantra. We always say that, and you know that. So the Constitutional Review Commission is basically anchored on certain principles, and these are the principles of accountability, the principles of inclusion, the principles of participation and all other stuff. So unlike the 1997 Constitution, that was a Constitution where we all talked about it. It was a Constitution where we hardly relate to, and that is because it was basically meant to facilitate the personal or political interests of an individual. So talking about how far we've gone in terms of ensuring that the new Constitution is people-centered, let's look at what we've done in terms of consultations from the beginning. When we came into office, we issued what we call an issues document. It was over 300 questions and so, where we triggered conversations around the Constitutional Review Commission provisions. So as part of the issues document, this issues document was basically circulated in the country and outside as well. And then when we went for the internal consultations, we've had a very, very, very consultative forum with Gambians across the country. And away from that, we have an online form where wherever you are in the country, whether in the country or outside, you can be able to have your voice. At the level of the Commission, we say every voice counts. We all know by virtue of the nature of the Constitution, we cannot put what every opinion has to say regarding the new Constitution. But at the level of the Commission, we are very certain that we will have a final document that majority of the Gambians will basically relate to. Because, before this Constitution will be finally approved, it will basically go through a referendum. So you cannot have, a Constitution that is tailored to satisfy a particular interest at the end of the day, it goes to a referendum and be rejected. I mean, this is not what we are basically looking for. So as a matter of fact, we're doing our best. We've basically done consultations with Gambians. You know, the online form is there. We went outside to talk to Gambians abroad. But also we had some stakeholder consultations where we met various institutions, including the executive, the judiciary, the security, sector, the IEC, and quite other institutions that are very relevant. And in fact, even as we speak now, institutions are coming. Just last week, we have the Immigration Department, the Ministry of agriculture, education, and all other institutions coming in, just to give in expert views as far as the Constitutional Review Commission is concerned. Just to also let you know, our mandate empowers us to select technical committees, where we would, engage the services of expert and subject specialists to help us in giving us expert views on some of these related issues. And we have a technical committee on, for example, communication and public education, technical committee on public finance, technical committee on land and natural resources environment, technical committee on constitutional law, and also a technical committee on constitutional drafting. So these are all, expert views that we bring in. So we ensure that as far as we want, the opinions of the general public, we also have a constitution that will, be in line with international standards to ensure that the constitution finally accepts, the will and aspirations of the Gambian people.
Right, thank you very much, Sekou Suare Jabai of the Constitutional Review Commission. Now, like I mentioned, this wouldn't be like a usual panel on GRTS. Of course, we are going to give you the opportunity to say what your questions are, to raise your concerns. And of course, I will make sure that my very seasoned panelists would get them answered. But before we do that, I'll just do my final round of questions. And I'll talk to the representative of the TRRC. I mean, the TRRC is one very huge process, but I'm with the conviction that justice and reconciliation cannot actually fit in one sentence. So how do you walk around that? If you talk about justice, it means the wrongs and the ills that people do, they have to pay for them. And then it's a totally different thing when you talk about forgiveness and reconciliation. So how exactly do you walk around these two?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. When we talk about reconciliation, it's not only looking at reconciliation between victims and perpetrators. It's beyond that. That can be part of it, where we have victims and perpetrators reconciling, forgiving one another for the wrongs that that they must have committed against each other. But it's far beyond just that. We all know how much divided our society is as Gambia, as a result of these violations of human rights that happened here in the 22 years between 1994 and January 2017. The society is so much divided. There is so much anger in people from different backgrounds, in the civil services, in the public sector, in the private sector. There are a lot of bad things that happen. And all these things, we need to be able to know the truth of how it happened. Let's say, for example, the first institutional hearing has given the media the opportunity to come up and express what has happened to the media, how the media's right has been violated. For that, that alone is healing for the media. The fact that they are given the platform to express to the nation, to tell the world how the media has been tormented in that year. They will be easily able to reconcile with that. That the society that has been divided as a result of politics, as a result of, let's say, bad actions of securities or whatever, get divided because of what has happened to them. What can the TRRC do? And that is why the reconciliation mandate has been given to the TRRC, that by the time that the truth is entirely disclosed out, the Gambians will now know what actually happened. Because there used to be a debate, an argument, that yes, in Jammeh's leadership there was a lot of human rights violations, a lot of disappearance, a lot of torture, unlawful detentions, etc. But there was a good number of people who also believed that those things never happened in this country. That there was entirely peace for the whole Gambia during the Jammeh's time. There was never a human rights violation. Now, how do we now know who is speaking the truth? The TRRC is helping us to get that truth out, to be able to reconcile with that truth. Yes, something actually happened in this country. How does it happen? Now we will know, we will accept, the government will agree that yes, the government has actually tormented its people. So people will reconcile with that fact that yes, something happened. But we'll not only know what happened, but will also teach us to prepare how to prevent ourselves from allowing those things to happen here ever. Because if you don't know what happened, you will not be able to prevent it. So reconciliation in general is, there is person-to-person reconciliation, which we can say victim-perpetrator reconciliation. Victims apologize. In fact, all the perpetrators that come will apologize to the people that they have offended. But it's left to the victims now to accept.